This is the all-new BMW M2 and there are a lot of things that you can say about it, but for me, all I want to do is to drive it. The M2 has built a reputation of being one of the most driver-focused, one of the most fun M cars in the entire stable. And true enough, for this second generation model, it's also the same story here. It's all of the driving enjoyment distilled into a small package that's fit for even the tightest back roads. Now, there are a lot of ways to define driving enjoyment, but no matter which way you look at it, I think the M2 here really aces all of them. If you're talking about powertrain, there's a 3-litre twin-turbo inline-6 engine in front of me, and it's the same one that you see on the BMW M3 and M4. And we already know how potent it can be on those cars, but on such a small package, well... Sure, it's been down-tuned slightly, but even then, at 460 horsepower, it's just 20 horsepower lower than the standard M3, and its top figures are completely unchanged. And on a smaller car like this, well, as it turns out, it's really quick. 0 to 100 km per hour in 4.1 seconds, and it'll let you accelerate all the way up to 250 km per hour before the electronics kick in to stop you. And before you know it, you're already at a corner that you need to slow down for, and the brakes on the BMW M2 here actually works really well. They come as standard with the compound brakes, and the brake pedals here actually modulate very well as well. So in a car like this where you need to trail brake into the corner, well, it's just a joy to use. And then there's the sound, and I might be a little biased here, but there's really nothing better than a good old BMW inline sixes. But for me, the way to measure actual driving enjoyment is through how the car handles. And on that note, this all-new BMW M2 just exceeds the mythical standards set by its predecessor. The front end here is so agile and incredibly sharp, and the car just tracks all of your movements from the steering wheel so completely and so directly. And with how the way the chassis is set up, the BMW M2 just stays almost completely flat when you corner, with just a little hint of body roll to give you the iconic fluidity from all BMW M models. BMW says that the all-new M2 has been fine-tuned on the Nürburgring, and it's actually quite obvious. Because of how bumpy the surfaces are on the notch lifer, the suspension here is actually still relatively pliant even on the most extreme drive mode. But when you're just driving on this kind of twisty back roads, you want to actually put the car into the regular sports mode instead for a more playful chassis. And on this kind of roads, the active M differential on the rear axle really just gives it so much grip, and believe me, it's actually really hard to break traction. But if you want to, you can actually just turn it all off, and the chassis is so well balanced that it's so easy to control as well. The BMW M2 is so good at sliding that there's even a special feature built into the infotainment display to tell you how good you're drifting. Talk about understanding its customer base. Now you may argue that for the most driver enjoyment, you really need the 6-speed manual gearbox here, and I actually agree with you, but that's unfortunately an option that we Malaysians do not get. But even with these flappy pedals, I can assure you that the M2 is still a ton of fun. I mean, just look at the smile on my face. And then of course, there's the looks, which, if I'm being completely honest, I'm still really not that big of a fan. I mean, from a distance, it actually looks pretty good, but it's when you get a little closer to the car, that's when you start to notice a lot of its character lines that just sort of clashes with each other. Take for example, the curvature of the bumper that sort of rounds off into the sides. But for some reason, at the corners down here, there's this very squared off air intakes. And there's also a curved scalloping around the emblem over here, but right beneath it, there's the two very square kidney grills. Overall, it just gives me the impression that there's no cohesive design language around this car. And when we move over to the side here, there's also a lot of character lines going on, especially down there near the side skirts. But if you look at this very straight profile line, it just doesn't gel well at all, be it either with the round wheel wells or even the shut lines of the doors. Towards the back though, this very short coupe roofline is just very classic BMW, and so is this Hofmeister King. The very flat wheel arches also give the M2 a very sporty stance on the road. And over at the back, I think it's actually quite alright, especially with this three-dimensional taillight design and the heritage-inspired emblem that really works very well with this light blue colour. When you look a bit lower though, well, how do I put this gently? It's gotten a little bit too 21st century, as in it's a good thing for me that the cabin in here looks really good, as in it's everything that I expect from a BMW M car, with all of the carbon fiber bits and also the red accents on the buttons as well. The curved display up here on the dashboard also actually makes the cabin feel a lot more modern, despite the shapes of the dashboard itself being sort of inspired from the 3 Series. Now these seats here are not the carbon seats that you see on all of the press photos. This is actually the seats that we'll be getting in Malaysia, but to be honest, I actually do kind of prefer this, because it still provides you with ample of support, especially when you're driving down the twisty back roads. And the best part about this is there's no weird hump in the middle down here, so you don't have to explain to your friends what that is for. Well, looks are subjective after all, so if you really like this design, then all the power to you. But if you ask me personally though, I'd much rather be sitting inside the driver's seat. With all that being said, when you own a car like this, all you really want to do is to drive it. Who cares if it looks a little weird? Who cares if it's now 600,000 ringgit? Because when you get strapped in and get going, all of these worries just immediately melt away, and you're left with perhaps the most pure joy you can get from a car. And there's also the fact that this is perhaps the last true blue sports car that you can buy from BMW, or at least one that has a proper engine. So you know what? I'm just gonna savor every moment of this. The BMW M2 is back and is truly better than ever before.